Hi, my name is Gwyneth Ralston. I will be answering first, number one, about cultural relativism. So, cultural relativism is a relativistic moral theory, which means that they believe there's no objective or universal moral truths, which means that right and wrong are objective. As the name suggests, cultural customs and beliefs are how the moral worth of an action is determined. For example, if someone from a country where cannibalism is part of their culture eats someone from a country like the United States where cannibalism is not permissible, a cultural relativist would argue that the action is morally good since their culture says that it's okay. However, as people from the United States who do not practice cannibalism, we would object to that and say that that action is not okay regardless of where it happens or who does it. The fact that morality is made so gray in cultural relativism gives room for lots of objections. So, an important argument of cultural relativism is the cultural differences argument. This is a two-part argument, and it grants that different cultures have different moral codes. Therefore, there is no objective truth in morality, and right and wrong are opinion-based, and opinions differ everywhere. So the cultural differences argument is invalid because even if two cultures disagree on something, one of them could be objectively right or wrong outside of cultural relativism. So there are five pillars or moral codes of cultural relativism. Number one is that different societies have different moral codes. Number two, the moral code of a society determines what is right in that society. That is, if the moral code of a society says that an action is right, then that action is right within that society. Number three, no objective standard can be used to judge one society's code as better than another's. There are no moral truths that hold for all people at all times. Number four is the moral code of our own society has no special status but is one among many. And number five is it is arrogant for us to judge other cultures. We should always be tolerant of them. So the five pillars are a slippery slope and can be objectionable to some people. For example, number five says judging other cultures is arrogant and we should always tolerate them, but under cultural relativism, if one culture has a custom of hating other cultures, that is okay amongst that culture. And this brings me to an important distinction for cultural relativism. So whatever country or culture one is in at that time, they should be held to the standards of that society while they are on its soil. To me, this is the furthest extent to having any kind of overarching moral code or enforcement, but it's still not really enough to do anything substantial universally. And a big problem that arises from the five pillars is that they don't allow for moral progress or identifying issues in one's culture standards, since cultural relativism says we cannot judge our own culture's standards, even if it was thousands of years ago. And so a very important question that naturally comes up with cultural relativism is morality objective? Can it be objective? And just as I don't think morality should be wholly subjective, I don't think it should be wholly objective either. I do agree with cultural relativists that all societies have different moral standards, which should not be discounted, but it also should not be used to justify inhumane things like cannibalism. Cultural relativism is an intriguing theory, but it's not practical. I will now answer number three about Kantian ethics. So as a philosophy minor, I've studied Kantian ethics in depth, and I have found that his theories are much more carefully laid out and formulaic than many other theories. And since Kantian ethics is so broad, I will just focus on his concepts of the good will, the categorical imperatives, and some objections to his theories. So first, the good will is a distinct moral goodness. Kant says that a person with good will is obligated to act out of duty. Some more modern interpretations will try to separate goodwill and morality, but under Kant's view, you should not try to evade the duties of morality. Goodwill is the only purely good thing, or something good in and of itself. In simple terms, Kant's categorical imperative is a maxim or principle which can be universally applied to any action to judge the moral goodness of that action. However, the maxim does not necessarily account for all people because everyone has different intentions and ends. These imperatives are easy to recognize because they include words such as ought, must, or should. These imperatives only apply to imperfect rational beings because perfectly rational beings or non-rational beings do not need commands to do the moral thing. There are 3 steps of the categorical imperative which help the maxim be rational. First is the universalizability principle, which checks for consistency. Second is the humanity principle, which ensures justice and means that we should never treat another person as a mean, always as an end. Because all rational beings have an equal amount of dignity and intrinsic worth, which should not be disrespected. The third is the universal legislator principle, or the formula of autonomy, which ensures fairness. Categorical imperatives state that someone's action is required by itself, not referencing any specific end. They also insinuate that the action is intrinsically good, meaning it is good for its own sake. Some well-known moral duties, such as never lying to oneself or others, never humiliating other rational beings, and endorsing happiness for others, without expectations for gratitude and praise, are examples of intrinsically good duties we, as humans, should abide to. Categorical imperatives and the moral goodness of goodwill depend on the principle of which it acts on, and an unconditionally goodwill. Categorical imperatives must not contradict itself ever. So some people object that Kant confuses rationality and moral goodness, emphasizing purity and rationality too much. And these people might ask, what about beings who are not rational enough to be fully self-liberating? Does that mean that they do not have dignity or deserve much mutual respect as part of the kingdom of ends? My response to this objection is that while Kant does uphold rationality as necessary, he also believes that while humanity runs on ends, we should ideally run on purity, mutual dignity, and respect. So I understand the objection, but I don't think it is a black and white situation. And one of Kant's most famous thought experiments is his murderer at the door scenario. In this scenario, a murderer is chasing your friend, and your friend knocks on your door to let them in. You do, but then the murderer knocks on your door and asks if your friend is there. And since Kant believes that lying is always wrong, he would tell you to give up your friend to the murderer. Obviously, many people object to this idea, and I also do. Seems like common sense not to tell the murderer where your friend is because you have an emotional connection to your friend and most likely a sense of duty to help save their life. However, Kant even responded to these types of objections in an essay and clarified that regardless of the consequences, you need to stay in line with the categorical imperative not to lie in order to be consistent and moral. Kantian ethics as a whole offers an interesting outlook on the nature of morals and duty. And even if his ethical systems are not widely in practice, they are very important to the study and progression of ethics as a field.